All right, y'all. Today, hopefully this phone will stop shaking. Today I want to talk to you guys about fruits. So we've talked about inflorescences and some about families and plant communities and so forth. And the last thing I wanted to cover really in detail was various fruit types. I don't think a lot of people, until they take botany, realize that things like vegetables are only culinary distinctions, and what they think of as berries actually aren't berries. And what they think of as seeds are actually fruits, and the seeds are actually on the inside. So I want to talk to you about all the different kind of fruits. This time I'm going to talk a little more in congruence with your botany coloring book. I'm just going to add some details that we see for flower structure. Okay, so we'll start off just like in your botany book, talking about dry, single-seeded fruits, and we'll see that structurally there's a lot of overlap. Let me see if I can get that to focus. Oh, it did it on its own. Dry single-seeded fruits. So structurally there's a lot of overlap here. Basically, we've got the... So once again, all of the fruits are basically coming from ovaries that mature. And we've got the stigma style of the ovary from that pistil. We can have multiple carpels within a single pistil and so forth. But one carpel usually gives rise to certain fruit types, and more than one carpel gives rise to other fruit types, especially when we're talking about dry single-seeded fruits. But either way, if we think about our standard stigma style and ovary here, then what goes on to become that particular fruit is this, okay? Is this ovary part. And in fact, these other parts often go on to form other parts of the fruit that can aid with dispersal. Maybe this has a hook shape that sticks to the fur of an animal. Maybe this has some other attribute to it that allows it to be carried away on wind and so forth. And we'll look at these other structures, okay? So basically, within here, what we've got when this matures into a fruit is the outermost layer that we call the pericarp here. Pericarp. Wow, it's pretty bad. P-E-R-I-C-A-R-P, pericarp. And then internal to that is this area, which is basically just space inside of the seed, right? So if we call this little area right here, this pericarp, this space where the seed is held is called the locule, okay? L-O-C-U-L-E, locule. And then the seed is usually attached to the wall of the pericarp by this portion that we call a funiculus, even though it kind of looks like funiculus or funiculus. But it's few, like F-Y-O-O for that pronunciation, for the funiculus, okay? And basically what we're going to see is a lot of different variations on this overall fruit form, okay? So if we look at, I don't know, if we look at a flower, it's a little triangular. If we look at a flower that just has some petals around it, and once again, don't make fun of me, y'all, and it's covered in these carpels, like we'll see in some of the members of the Ranunculaceae family, or the Rosaceae family, even more, then each one of these is going to form one of these fruits right here, okay? So that's what we'll see there. Now, there's a lot of different variations on this, okay? If we have, let me think, what else? Okay, so here we've got one carpel, and this is one carpel. Don't think that necessarily there has to be one carpel in the flower, right? This is just one carpel giving rise to one fruit. Sometimes we have more than one carpel giving rise to a single fruit. Sometimes we have more than one carpel giving rise to a single fruit that splits up into multiple fruits once it matures, okay? So here, let's take this version here. If we take this, and whatever, we got a 1, 2, 3, we have this thing called a samara. which is basically just an akene, which is just a fruit that has a dry outer, hard outer layer that we call a pericarp that's holding a seed on the inside within the locule attached to the pericarp by the funiculus, okay? This is called an akene. Now, sometimes this akene has this outgrowth of the pericarp that we call a wing, and a winged akene is just a samara. We see these samaras. I've got a buddy who named his daughter Samara. I was like, do you know what that even means? He's like, what do you mean? I was like, it's a winged fruit. So anyways, we see this in ash trees. Now, sometimes people will also call samaras, here, let me try to draw this. We'll also call maples samaras, and I do this sometimes too. And maples, but since this is usually two attached together, usually we would call this a mericarp, because this is more than one carpel attached together. Technically, it's a winged samara or a winged akene, because there's more than one attached from more than one carpel. Technically, we call this a mericarp. Now, in my videos, I've got a mericarp. So if we look at, let me see if I can draw this. If we look at this little structure that we'll see, which is a fruit of a Carolina geranium, Geranium carolinaeum. 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. There's another petal. Now see, we'll see this little thing, this technically, if you split it open, you'll see it has these multiple fruits on the inside. And you'll see that in a video that I've got. This technically is a mericarp, but here, because we've got more than one carpel here forming this fruit. Now, each one of these fruits, if we were to splice one out, looks exactly like we've seen before. It's just this fruit that has this pericarp on the outside. It's got this locule space and then this funiculus where the seed's attached on the inside, okay? This is a superior ovary. This is compound, meaning that there's more than one in there. There's more than one pistil in there. Here, and that's what's important for here, okay? So this is where we have a mericarp, all right? And we'll see this, I think, in your botany coloring book. They look at some other species like hollyhocks and so forth that form mericarps that split into a lot of different ones. Okay. Now, okay, there's another dry single-seeded fruit type that has more than one carpel that we see called a schizocarp. We see this commonly in the Apiaceae family, where we've got, this is a weird looking one, y'all, where we've got this weird seed that will split in half. And each one of these in the side will look like whatever. It will basically look the same. It will have this outer pericarp. It will have this locule. Inside there'll be a funiculus where the seed is attached. Still similar arrangement. In this particular case, where we're looking at the Apiaceae, or the carrot or parsley family, here we've got inferior ovaries, and we've got two. The reason this is bicarpellate is because it has two fused carpels. Two fused carpels that lead to the formation of that particular fruit type. Okay? Typically, you'll hear schizocarp used at other times, but it's most appropriate for the fruit that's formed within the Apiaceae, or that carrot/parsley family, okay? Now, if we look at the Poaceae, or the grasses. Let me see if you guys can see that. Let me see if I can pan this down some. Hold on. Hopefully I won't get you guys nauseous. Okay, now if we look at like a grass flower, let's see, a little grass and then a little tiny flower, and then we've got whatever the other parts talked about before here, and then, you know, we've got some stamens in here, and then once again on the inside we've got this 2 carpels and this superior ovary, and this little thing in here will go on to form this fruit type that we call Caryopsis, which basically kind of looks like a kernel of corn in this. So is a kernel of rice, by the way. And this is just where you have the seed directly attached to that outer pericarp, okay? There's no loculus space. The loculus has been lost. This whole thing right in here is seed. Hopefully you guys can see that. And I've got most of that for you to see. Now, something... what else we have? We've got, the Asteraceae family. So something like sunflowers, for example. You guys are all familiar with sunflower seeds. And if you look at, like, I don't know, let's pretend we've got like a dandelion here. We've got this inferior ovary. We've got these 2 fused carpels down in here. And, one of these turns into the seed, one into seed. And then what this essentially, like, let's say this is a dandelion, right? You guys can imagine a dandelion with the yellow petals on top there, right? This thing matures into what we call a cypsela, which isn't unlike any of the other dry single-seeded fruits, except for that it's attached to this long, frilly, poofy thing we call a pappus, which aids in wind dispersal. But everything else is the same. We've got a pericarp. We've got this funiculus where the seed's attached within the loculus space. And that's coming from this dandelion or Asteraceae, unique fruit type that we see in that particular family. Okay? What else do we have? Nuts. Okay, so nuts. We've got a, once again, we've got another inferior ovary. Here, let's see if I can draw this weird flower that we see in the filberts. This is a hazelnut, okay? Hazelnut flowers. I can't remember if they're in the Himamelidaceae, but they have these ribbon-like petals, and whatever, we've got a leaf coming off to the side, maybe, because this is a tree. But then this flower has this inferior ovary, once again with 2 carpels, and then that's going to mature into, can you guys even see that? Here, let me pull that up. That's going to mature into a nut, which is not unlike the rest of the structure we've seen. We've got this outer pericarp. Difference here is that this is woody, right? Lignin, additional cellulose deposition in here. We've got a funiculus, and then the seed inside of that as well, okay? Acorns are this as well. And that gives you a breakdown, I think, of most of the single-seeded, dry single-seeded fruits. So the outside of that pericarp is dry upon maturity. We've got these achenes. And in fact, what we'll see here in a little bit is strawberries, essentially just collections of achenes, where those the dry outer pericarp actually gives rise to this fleshy substance, which is like the red of the strawberry. But the rest of that, there's just basically a million achenes all over the surface of that strawberry. We've got samaras like we see in ash trees. We've got mericarps like we'll see inside of those Carolina geraniums here, where we've got this crane's bill with all these tiny little fruits on the inside that come from this flower with a superior ovary, but a compound pistil with multiple carpels. And then each one of these fruits is filled with these seeds, and I have video of that. I mentioned before that you'll hear maples seeds called samaras, but technically these are mericarps, and also technically because it's bicarpellate, meaning that it's comprised of two carpels, you could probably even call it a schizocarp. I'm pretty sure I've heard it use that as well, or I've heard that terminology used as well, because it's this these two fused carpels here, like we see in the rest of the Apiaceae family, for their fruits, okay? And then we've got the Caryopsis, like we see in the grass family, coming from two carpels with a superior ovary. And then we've got inferior ovaries that lead to the development of a cypsela, like we see in the Asteraceae family. And then even in nuts, which is hilarious because most people think that all of these are nuts, right? And these come, the outside pericarp is woody in this case. We've got inferior ovary, two carpels, just like we have in the Apiaceae family with the schizocarp. Okay, so just trying to add some extra detail to how the flowers correspond to the particular fruit types for dry single-seeded fruits. Okay, now those are what we call indehiscent, meaning that they don't split open. Dry multi-seeded fruits are dehiscent. It looks like dehiscent or something, but it's dehiscent and indehiscent, okay? So in dry many-seeded fruit types, these fruits are going to usually be dispersed in some way where the seeds will go all over the place, right? If you had a fruit, and most textbooks talk about this, if you had a fruit that had a ton of different seeds where it didn't split open, then they would all end up in the same location, and then they would compete amongst each other, and that doesn't make any sense at all, right? So if we look at our dry many-seeded fruits, we can talk about a lot of different things that look like beans, but only one of them being a legume, something that you'd associate with your idea of bean, okay? The first one that we call okay, first, I don't even know if I can do this, y'all. I'm so bad at drawing this. Let's see here. If I can draw 1, 2, 3. If I can show any three-dimensionality here, I'm making an attempt at drawing, and this is going to be 4, 5, maybe. Oh, that's so bad, y'all. Let me try like an aerial view. So this would be the lengthwise side of Columbine. If we look straight down Columbine, though, it kind of looks like a 1, 2, 3, 4. It kind of looks like a star. There's these little sections here. And then we've got this stem in the middle. And each one of these petals is this spur-like petal that we see some of in the from Anna the Rana in the Ranunculaceae family with the delphiniums as well. But Columbine, each one of these have their own carpels, right, within Columbine, because they have 5 simple pistils within each one, and then each one of these produce 5 follicles. So if we were to look at a follicle within this one, and I believe I've got some video footage of this, it kind of just looks like a split bean. And inside, we've seen a lot of these things before, right? The outermost layer is the pericarp. The internal space is still a locule. But now we've got multiple seeds. We've got multiple funiculi, or a lot of funiculuses attached to these seeds, okay? Now that kind of looks like a bean, right? So what kind of separates this is that only the front here, only this front part will split open. So I've got one split here. And that's going to be different than what we usually associate with a legume or what you think of in a bean in the Fabaceae family, because we're going to have two splits, okay? And we're going to add an extra term there because we have two splits. So once again, going back to the Fabaceae family, we've got these, we've got this center portion. Hold on, let me draw these two things. And we've got these wings, and then this, whatever, this banner, and then keel, and then these wings. That's my terrible Fabaceae or pea flower family. And we've got this down in here. We've got this simple pistil. All right, an ovary down in here. Got a simple pistil. Anyways, what that essentially will turn into is what you'll see. Wow, that looks like a butterfly, and it's terrible. But this is my... That's so bad, I'm going to have to redraw it, y'all. Hold on, it's more curved. Little better. Little better. Okay. So here, we've got multiple splits. This thing is splitting on both sides. And I believe I try to pull one of those apart for you when I get a hold of some vetch legumes out in the garden. Once again, we've got some seeds are actually usually on this side. Funiculus, seeds. And then we've got the outer pericarp. And then we've got each one of these, by the way, when it splits, because these multiple splits, is called a valve. Each half is called a valve, okay? But we've got multiple splits here. Only the front or one side splits open in the follicle. Multiple splits here in the legume, okay? Now, we've got kind of another variation of this, like we'll see in the Brassicaceae or in the mustard family, when we've basically got a compound pistil in this case. Let me see if I can. Here we've got. Wow, that is an extremely consistent flower, y'all. Extremely consistent flower. Here we've got some stamens, and then we've got some, whatever, is that my, so bad. It looks like a box with, don't judge me. I'm going to get to grade y'all's notebook. And I'm just, also just riffing. So here we've got some mustard plant family flower. Oh, y'all, I have to redraw it. It's so bad. Let's just go with simple cross-shaped flower. Okay. We've got a compound pistil down in here. Got some stamens or whatever. And what this is going to form is this fruit that is going to, once again, look kind of like a legume. But in here, we've got a new structure that forms from this compound pistil. Down in here it was, in this terrible version, into here, okay? So what we have is this new structure that we call a rhiplum. And then attached from the sides of this rhiplum are the funiculi and these seeds. And each side of what we call a siliqua, because that's what this fruit type is called, siliqua. falls away and the seeds remain attached. So these two valves pop off. We've got two splits here. And each side falls away. In this siliqua, we're left with these seeds attached to this rheplum. And then those seeds will be dispersed from there. Now there's a weird flat version of this, and I'm kind of kicking myself because I have candy tuft, which is the plant that gives rise to the flat versions of these siliquas that we call silicles, but I don't have video footage of that. Nonetheless, I've still got some Brassicaceae representatives and some siliqua video footage to kind of show you what those look like in real life, okay? Now, the last version, and the only one I have footage of, is one type of capsule that we see in irises that's called a loculicidal capsule. But there's just a couple different kinds of capsules where we'll get some splits amongst these. Jeez, those are supposed to originate there. We've got these different capsules that form at the base of these flowers. So at the top of here, if you can just kind of imagine, I know it's disastrous, we've got these irises forming, or these iris blooms forming from the Iridaceae family. So we've got these three petals and those three petaloid sepals, and then those stamens attached to those sepals. And so we've got this iris, and at the base of it, after it blooms, this fruit from this ovary forms this capsule. And we see capsules like this in the Liliaceae family as well. And poppies also form their own type of capsule where they're kind of like a giant salt or pepper shaker, where they're called a peristal capsule and they shoot out of pores in the top. But if we were to look in this, and I'm pretty sure, once again, I have video footage of pulling this apart, you see these different separations in the fruit structures that are called septa. And these are just walls that form in between the carpels. And essentially, if we were to slice open and kind of look at the top of that, we basically have a structure that looks like this with these separate compartments, and attached to these compartments we've just got seeds. And what's really strange about the loculicidal capsule, like you would think that all of the seeds here would split right here at the septa. And in septicidal capsules like we see in lilies, that's what happens. But in the Iridaceae, or the irises, we have these splits form halfway between. And it's just another variation. So when the fruit matures and splits open, it splits not at the septa or the creases in the fruit, but halfway between each of the creases. And it just has to do with the way that the fruit matures and the overall architecture or the layout of that particular fruit type, okay? So you'll see a lot of different types of capsules out there in a lot of different families. So dry, many-seeded fruits, dehiscent, split open. We still see pericarp. We still see locule space. We still see funiculi and multiple seeds. We now have things called valves, where we have basically each half or piece of this particular fruit. Sometimes the valves fall completely away and there's this remaining rheplum like we see in siliquas, which is indicative of the mustard or Brassicaceae family. And then sometimes we have capsules form at the base of a lot of these different flowers that can be loculicidal, septicidal, pericidal, different versions on how those different capsules will split open as they mature, okay? Now, the last thing I want to talk to you about is fleshy fruit types, things that we're all familiar with, okay? So, these obviously do not split open, not unless you step on them and pull them open or something like that. So going back to our kind of stigma style ovary, and we've got these, let me just kind of draw a flower that we'll recognize here. We've got this superior ovary, and the simple pistil. So just whatever, this is simple, superior, we'll just write sup right up here, and then we've got these, you know. See, sometimes my flowers aren't terrible. I think it has to do with how hard I'm concentrating on how hard I'm concentrating on discussing this stuff versus drawing it. And I think you'll be surprised too. You can actually, if you pay really close attention in one part of each plant, you can draw these things decently as long as you're focused on them, not also trying to talk about them simultaneously. So when we look at our fleshy fruit types, I know y'all are gonna have lots of good laughs at me. One of the things that I get to show you are the plums on the plum trees out front, on the purple leaf plum trees that I've got, because they were some of the first fleshy fruits to mature in the garden and things that I didn't get from the grocery store. And plums and almonds and peaches, these things form drupes, okay? And these are similar to dry fruits, but they're a little thicker, and so they have these separate layers on the outside of the fruits. Okay, so the pericarp can be divided into exo, meso, and endocarp. And if we were to look at this, we basically have this peach type structure, right? We've got this peach type structure, and on the inside, so we've got this thin, especially. Got this very thin layer of exocarp, and then we've got this pretty thick layer of mesocarp, and then the endocarp, which is pretty thick and tough, and what a lot of people think the seed is in things like plums and peaches and almonds and so forth. Well, it is, but in peaches and plums, a lot of people think this is the seed, but the seed is once again inside of that endocarp, and there's still a loccule space, and there's still a seed attached to a funiculus right there. Now, this is attached. Well, this would be upside down, by the way. This would be hanging upside down if this was the stem, right? That would be facing down this way, if that makes any sense, okay? So if it may be a little easier if you think about this in terms of like a cherry or something like that, or but still, it makes sense, right? We've got stigma style ovary, and then essentially stigma style, and then this ovary now is forming this fleshy portion. And fleshy fruit can be simple and what we call true fruits, because we also have false fruits where we have other accessory parts of the flower formed or help forming the fruits. Okay, so we'll see when we look at like palms, for example, like apples, we have the hypanthium from the flower actually forming part of the fleshy fruit portion. Okay, so here once again we still just got ovary going on. Now we've got this is called a drupe, by the way, drupe. Hilariously enough, if you take this thing and shrink it down and attach it to the receptacle of a flower, so like if we take this and we, let me draw this real quick. We've got all these ovaries, and then we've got all of these, whatever, we'll draw let's just make really skinny stigmas and styles poking off the top of these. And then we'll make this the surface of a flower. Wow, so bad, y'all. Anyways, you get the idea. So here, if we're looking at, this is basically, each one of these is basically a miniaturized drupe, and we call this a druplet. And this is because there's a bunch of them all stuck here to the surface. What happens is this receptacle actually grows and swells inside the inner portion of this flower, and this forms an aggregate fruit with many druplets, and we recognize these as things like blackberries and raspberries. And blackberries oftentimes will still be plucked with the receptacle on the inside, whereas raspberries come free from the receptacle of the flower, okay? It'll be removed completely. That's why you look on the inside of a lot of raspberries, they're empty, right? But each one of these little drupelets looks just like this, okay? Those little tiny little parts of the stigma and styles are still poking off the top, and you'll notice that when I do close video on raspberries and raspberries. I think I use raspberries. Hilariously enough, though, y'all, these aren't even proper berries. Berries are fruits that have highly developed exo and mesocarps, and then they've got a bunch of seeds interdispersed within their loculus space. And berries, crazily enough, are things like tomatoes or grapes. If we take a cross-section of a grape, for example, we've still got this exocarp, and then we've got this thin mesocarp, so we don't have this thick, highly developed mesocarp like we see in a drupe. And then we've got a ton of this loculus space, and then whatever, we've got multiple seeds if you're eating. Some grape varieties, we've bred these to be so small that they're no longer functional, right? We've done that a bunch. We did the same thing with bananas. Bananas had seeds and have seeds, a lot of varieties, but we bred them so small to where they're basically sterile because the seeds have been bred to be so small they're no longer functional, okay? So when we look at the flower from one of these things, right, we've got, I don't know if I can draw this. Let me try and draw this upside down. We've got this compound, superior ovary. So let's write compound, superior ovary. And we've got some petals that I'm always so good at drawing. And then this is going to coincide with this, okay? In fact, if you know, let's draw, we'll even draw some sepals here. Sepals, y'all, you see sepals at the top of like a tomato, right? This portion here, let's draw this into a tomato. That's that little green stuff sticking out of the top of the tomato. Those are just the sepals, remnant of that, or the sepal remnants of that flower with compound ovary, that compound superior ovary, okay? If that makes any sense. Hopefully it does, okay? What else can I tell y'all? Yeah, in the end of this, so this, we didn't even draw the stigma and the style. The end of the stigma style, y'all, you'll see this. I mean, if you turn a tomato upside down, you can see essentially what once was the stigma. So just trying to kind of bring you back to the overall flower arrangement and how it corresponds to the particular fruit, okay? Trying to keep that straight for you, if that makes any sense, okay? All right, so now we've got, we're talking about, okay, so we're talking about fleshy fruits, we've talked about drupes, and we've talked about druplets like we see in aggregate fruits, and then we've talked about berries, and then let's talk about, we'll do pepos next because that's probably the most logical flow. So we can also see kind of a thin exocarp and a highly developed mesocarp and not much loculus space at all in a pepo. So if we look at a pepo, and we'll draw it kind of looks like this again. Let's kind of redraw this. We'll draw it a little more I don't know, rough on the outside. If we look at like a pepo, now we've got another weird layer, because in this case the receptacle has grown up and over, has grown up and over the outside of this pepo, and that forms the skin of the cucumber. And in fact, if you see that's the dark green stuff. But essentially, the skin is also includes the exocarp, which is this next layer here, and that's also got some green in it. You'll notice this next time you slice a cucumber open, and I drew it a little too thick here for sure. But here we've got the skin, which is this outer receptacle, and this exocarp comprising the skin of the cucumber. And a lot of people peel that off, right? So this is skin, and this is receptacle, exocarp. And then we've got some interesting partitions, oftentimes, where we have these seeds interdispersed in and amongst the, I believe it's mesocarp in pepos. So this is mesocarp. The seeds are just sitting in there, stuck. It's hard to tell when you look at a fruit whether or not you're looking at, what essentially is loculal space holding on to these seeds and so forth, unless you pluck the seeds out, which you'll see if you pull the seeds out of a cucumber, they're touching fleshy material, and that fleshy material, because of its development, is essentially mesocarp, whereas in something like a berry, for example, the seeds are interdispersed within the locule, and there's not really much of an endocarp there, okay? Or I think the endocarp's missing completely. Where we see endocarp is in the drupes and in the druplets, and we'll also see it as a layer in some of our other fruits, okay? So now when we get into false fruits, we're talking about fruits that are derived from flower parts that aren't the ovary itself. And you can see here we're kind of into a weird version of this with the berries and with the pepos. And once again, this is what a banana is, except for we bred these seeds out of it and we've made them sterile. It's also highly susceptible to disease, which is why we've actually had to switch banana varieties throughout history. We used to have a totally different banana back in the 60s and 70s than we have now. So if we look at accessory fruits, we can look at something like a palm. God, I'm so bad at drawing apples, y'all. Probably not surprising to you guys. But if we look at once again, we've got our stigma-style ovary. We've got this hypanthium-like structure, right? We've got this, I don't know how to quite draw this. I'm trying to draw a little cup around here where we have the stamens, which are kind of fused to this layer, kind of form this neat little cup-like structure that is going to form the back of this particular flower and our apple blossom, right? We've even got, obviously, I'm not drawing everything. We've got semen. We've got sepals and petals and stamens and what else do we have? And this is all the hypanthium, okay? So this is the hypanthium. Hypanthium, and then this hypanthium is essentially going to develop into this palm, okay? So this is essentially, it's probably easiest if I just start off by drawing all the other layers that you would typically see in a drupe that form from the ovary. But this hypanthium develops into this accessory. Basically, most of the fruit that you eat in an apple is derived from this hypanthium. That's what all this stuff is, hypanthium. So this part of the fruit is actually formed from the fusion of those other tissue layers, like we see with the stamens and the sepals and the petals, all fused together into that hypanthium, okay? We still have things you recognize, seeds in the center of the apple. There's an endo and exo and mesocarp all in here, right? We've got the exo and meso and endocarp. Endocarp in here. We've got what else we got here? We've got this, got the stem here, right? That corresponds with I wish I would have drawn this upside down. That corresponds with this upside down because this right here is this right here. So once again, just like we see in the tomato, we've got that stigma there at the bottom of the palm or the apple here, okay? No other accessory or false fruits formed from other parts of the flower besides just the ovary include things like strawberries. And once again, the receptacle grows up into the center, kind of like we see in a blackberry versus a raspberry that we can just pull off that receptacle. If we look at a raspberry, which is kind of like a terrible triangle right here, what we've got, if you've ever sliced a raspberry in half, you can see that white fleshy area. It will kind of look like this on the inside. We've got the top of that strawberry right there. What we have here is, actually, let me draw this way, you guys. Let me draw it this way so that you can have an idea of what we're looking at. So here we've got the, wow, that's a huge receptacle. But anyways, check this out. This is a strawberry, right? And we can see here, we've got this. Now, the way this actually grows is from the swelling of the receptacle in that strawberry flower. So this flower, which is actually covered in a ton of different pistils, right? A bunch of different pistils. I mean, there's also stamens in here. But the top of a flower in a strawberry is covered with all of these and I mean, also, these stigma-style ovaries. These all develop, essentially, these all become achenes, except for this outermost layer becomes fleshy, and that's what gives us the outermost layer of the strawberry fruit. That receptacle swells on the inside, and this is essentially literally just this. This just swells into that, okay? All of these pistils become each individual little fruitlet that is an achene, that has some fleshiness to it in the strawberry, okay? So that's just another accessory fruit formed from more parts of the flower than just the ovary. Here you can see how the flower, and like this would have petals, right? You can see how the flower corresponds very closely with the fruit in this particular case, all right? Now, if we look at something, once again, we've got compound superior ovary. I'll try to draw that. And then this is my flower in the Rutaceae, or the citrus family. I hope you guys can see that. Can't exactly see what you guys are looking at. But anyways, compound superior ovary. Here we have got the formation. And we can just, once again, draw a big circle. It has a lot of different layers to it. Except for this time, you guys know, got some unique things going on. We have the exo and the mesocarp essentially forming what we call, here, let me add another little layer in there, forming what we call the rind, or the outermost layer. And then what's weird is that the endocarp has this fleshy-like projection into the inside. that we eat or that you don't eat, maybe that you chew or maybe that you spit out. But this fleshy-like projection is filled with essentially a liquid or literally citrus juice of some kind that just fills that loccule space, okay? And the seeds are also interdispersed here inside of a citrus fruit. We call this citrus fruit a hesperidium. But the endocarp has these fleshy-like projections that fill this loccule space. Or you could also say the loccule is filled with fleshy-like projections filled with juice. And the outermost layers of the pericarp, the exo and mericarp, form that hardened, oil-filled rind that we're familiar with, okay? Now, there's also weird fruits that we call multiple fruits. This is what a fig is. We've talked a little bit about a fig as kind of a weird example. But these flowers on the inside, or the inner chamber of a fig, and I'll just draw them like that. We won't even draw them as flowers, but these are all little tiny flowers. These kind of grow into each other and form this fruity, in my opinion, pretty gross-like layer. And then things like a pineapple as well. If we look at a pineapple, I don't know, is that a pineapple, y'all? If we look at a pineapple, I don't know the best way to draw a pineapple. Is that it? I don't know. I saw a hilarious talk. I should probably link you guys on this that broke down the geometry of the SpongeBob pineapple and how it was mathematically impossible. But what's really funny is if you look at one of these, it's weird how pineapples form because each one of these is the formation or overlapping of a bract. So if we kind of blow this portion up here, this is a bract, right? Or that modified petal. Essentially, during development, there are modified leaf rather, there are petals that we'll see that you see early on in the development of pineapples, and the flower of a pineapple, but they all grow into each other, and these are more petals, right? In fact, sometimes there'll be like a little reminiscent portion of a petal or a flower here, but they all grow in and smush into each other so that when those flowers and their modified leaves and petals push against and develop into one another, they form this giant, what we call multiple fruit, which is a ton of different flowers pushing together to form the overall structure of that fruit. And I think that's a pretty good roundabout way to kind of give you a breakdown of all the different fleshy fruit types, right? So we've got drupes, essentially just these true fruits with, we have a simple pistil and a superior ovary that forms into a fleshy portion of pericarp that can be divided into the exo, the meso, and the endocarp that a lot of people think is the seed, but is just that innermost layer of the pericarp. Within that, you still see this loccule space that holds the seed and the funiculus. And then we've got miniature versions of those like we see in druplets and aggregate fruits, where we've got a bunch of these drupes all shoved together and attached to the inner receptacle of that flower, where we've got a bunch of different simple pistils attached to the surface of that particular flower with the superior ovaries. And then we've got so these druplets or aggregate fruits, we usually refer to colloquially as berries, but actually in botanical terms, berries include things like grapes and tomatoes, where we have this outer exo and mesocarp. See that? Where we have this outer exo and mesocarp, and then we've got some loccule space with seeds interdispersed, or not because we've bred them out of there, but still we've got these compound superior ovaries leading to the formation of this fruit type. Sometimes we get the receptacle growing up over the outermost pericarp, in which case we form pepos like we see in things like squashes and cantaloupes and bananas and cucumbers and so forth. And these flowers are compound inferior ovaries. Actually, I don't think I ever drew the flower for the pepo formation, but here we have these inferior ovaries, and we get this growth of the receptacle outside that particular ovary, up and over it to form the pepos. Then we have accessory fruits, where we've got fruits forming from tissue besides just the ovary of that particular flower, like the hypanthium that we essentially eat when we eat an apple, and we call these fruits palms. And we've got strawberries is also forming from other tissues, like essentially the receptacle and all of these multiple pistils on the top, all these simple carpels on the outside of the strawberry flower here that form achenes that have this fleshy outer layer that kind of grow into each other, and then we eat the receptacle and all those achenes together. And then we have, what else we got? Oh, hesperidiums, like we see in the citrus flowers that have compound superior ovaries, and the outermost layer of exo and mesocarp form that rind, and the endocarp has these fleshy juice-filled projections that go into the lockule that still hold those seeds. And we have multiple fruits, like figs and pineapples, where multiple flowers all grow into one another and form this fleshy fruit that we eat. Pineapples form from bracts, and the center of figs formed by all of those flowers growing into one another. So hopefully just kind of giving you a breakdown of all of the different fruit types in association with the flowers that they derive from.